Have you ever noticed, the more we try to control the day, the more it slips through our fingers? There's something quietly ironic about it. We wake up rushing, planning, thinking we're in charge, but the heart's peace isn't found in control. It's found in the way we begin. So what if, instead of chasing the day, you met it like an old friend? There is a teaching from the Buddha, simple but powerful. 5 lines to speak to yourself each morning. Not as a performance, but as a gentle remembering. In this video, we'll walk slowly through each line, from the first breath of gratitude to the quiet strength of inner peace. Not just words, but a practice that can shift how you live. And stay with me until the end, because there's a story about a broken mirror and the monk who refused to fix it. What he said changed the way I see myself, and it might stay with you too. So if you're ready to begin this day differently, not with noise but with presence, let's step in together. And if this path speaks to you, join our journey by subscribing to Lotus Light Teachings. The road is gentle. You don't have to walk it alone. Chapter 1. When the light first touches, a morning gratitude meditation. I used to wake up with a to-do list already echoing in my head. Emails, messages, deadlines, noise. And for a long time, I mistook that noise for being alive. Until one morning, I woke up to silence. It was one of those soft mornings, when the sun rises so gently it almost asks for permission. A golden thread of light slipped through the paper-thin curtain and landed quietly on the floor beside my bed. There was no alarm, no rush, only the faint chirp of a bird outside and the hum of a world that hadn't quite decided to be busy yet. And in that space, for reasons I can't fully explain, I just breathed. Deeply, consciously, for the first time in a long while. And something shifted. I am grateful for this new day. I whispered, not as a performance, but as a remembering. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. But because something in me understood that this moment, this breath, was a gift. We often think gratitude is something we feel when things go well. When we get the job. When the test comes back negative. When someone remembers our birthday. But in Buddhist teaching, gratitude isn't just a reaction. It's a way of seeing, a lens. There's a beautiful story passed down in the old Dharma circles. A man, just an ordinary man, receives a message in a dream. You will die tomorrow. He wakes up in a cold sweat, panicked. But then, something unexpected happens. He doesn't run or cry or hide. Instead, he makes tea. He drinks it slowly, tasting every swirl of steam as though it were the first time. He walks to the river and watches the ripples dance over pebbles, as if they were performing just for him. He smiles at strangers. He forgives old wounds. And as the sun begins to set on what he believes is his final day, he bows not to fear, but to the miracle of being awake at all. And then, he doesn't die. He lives. But he's never the same. This is the essence of gratitude as the Buddha taught it. Not a checklist of nice things, but an awakening to the sacredness of now. Because truthfully, every morning could be our last. That's not a morbid thought. It's a freeing one. When we see the morning not as just another Tuesday, but as a fragile, unrepeatable unfolding, suddenly even the smallest details glow. The warmth of tea against our palms, the way our breath fogs the window, the sleepy smile of someone we love, or even the silence when we realize we are still here. Gratitude in this way is not about ignoring pain or pretending everything's okay. It's about acknowledging that even amidst the mess, something precious remains. Life itself. When I first began the practice of saying, I am grateful for this new day, I thought it was just a mental trick, a way to force positivity. But it's not about forcing anything. It's about returning to presence, to humility, to wonder, even to sorrow when it visits. Because sometimes what we're grateful for isn't what happened, but what didn't. The breakdown that didn't last forever. The anger that passed like a storm. The moment we chose stillness instead of reaction. Buddhist mindfulness teaches that gratitude isn't passive. It's a discipline of attention, a way of directing the heart. And the beautiful thing is, it doesn't require anything external to change. You don't need more money or better luck or less pain. You only need to notice. Sometimes I think about the older woman I met at a retreat once. She'd lost her husband and her daughter in the same year. When I asked her how she kept going, she didn't say anything profound. She just pointed to the sky and said, "The clouds still move." She taught me that real gratitude isn't loud. It doesn't shout with joy. Sometimes it sighs through tears. Sometimes it just says, "This hurts, but I'm still here. Thank you." And there's such power in that. Because when you greet the day with this kind of heart, you move through the world differently. You soften. You pause more. You argue less. You start noticing things you used to overlook. Like the way your dog tilts its head when it's confused, or the way sunlight filters through leaves like stained glass. These moments become altars, and suddenly, life becomes sacred again, even when it's imperfect, especially when it's imperfect. So if you're wondering how to begin this practice, how to make gratitude something more than just a nice idea, start small. Start as you are. Maybe tomorrow morning you set your phone aside for just 5 minutes. Sit somewhere near a window. Let the light find you. Place your hands on your lap. And as you breathe in, say inwardly, "This moment is enough." As you breathe out, whisper, "I am grateful." Let it be that simple. Let it be yours. Let it be real. You don't need incense or chants or perfect posture. You just need sincerity. The universe hears whispers as clearly as shouts. And if your morning starts messy, if the alarm fails or the kids are screaming or your body aches, then all the more reason to find the one steady thing. Your breath, your heart, your ability to notice something beautiful, even in the chaos. Because that's where awakening begins. Not in temples far away, but in the gentle decision to meet this new day with a soft, open gaze. So yes, say it, "I am grateful for this new day." Say it when the sky is gray and your spirit feels dull. Say it when you're late and stressed and don't want to be awake. Say it when you've just cried and your eyes are still puffy. Say it anyway, and little by little you will start to feel what the Buddha meant when he said, "Let us rise up and be thankful. For if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick. And if we got sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful. Because the truth is, you woke up. That alone makes this day holy." And so I invite you, as this video gently fades into stillness, to close your eyes with me for just a moment. Let's try it together. Take a deep breath, feel your chest rise, and let it go slowly. Now, place your hand on your heart and repeat in your mind or softly aloud, "I am grateful for this new day. I am grateful for this breath. I am grateful for another chance to love, to grow, to see, to be." Let this be the way you begin. Not just the day, but your life, again and again. Quietly, kindly, awake. Chapter 2. The River That Never Stops, Embracing Impermanence. I used to believe that if I could just hold things tight enough, they wouldn't leave. The people I loved, the moments that made me feel alive, even the version of myself that once smiled more easily. I gripped them with invisible hands, hoping that if I tried hard enough, I could freeze time or at least slow it down. But life, as it turns out, doesn't work like that. It never did. It flows quietly, stubbornly, like a river that doesn't ask for permission. Have you ever watched a river closely? Not just looked at it, but really watched it. The way it moves without hesitation. How it carries fallen leaves, broken branches, sunlight, shadow. It never clings, never says, "Let me hold this moment a little longer." It just moves. That's what the Buddha was trying to tell us when he spoke of impermanence. That everything we love, everything we fear, everything we are, is in constant motion. Not to punish us, but to set us free. There's a Zen story I've carried with me for years. The kind that clings to the edge of your heart and won't let go until it softens something. A revered monk once lived in a small wooden temple nestled in the mountains. It wasn't large or grand, but it was home. Every stone in the courtyard, every scroll on the wall, every pot of tea held years of quiet devotion. One night, a fire broke out. No one knows how, and in moments, it devoured everything. The next morning, the villagers gathered around the smoldering remains, their eyes wide with grief. But the old monk, he simply stood there, gazing at the ashes. Then he bowed, slowly, deeply, and as the wind stirred the smoke into the trees, he whispered, "Everything is like a dream." Then he turned, picked up a broom, and began sweeping. At first, when I heard this story, I thought it was poetic exaggeration. Surely, no one could be that calm after losing so much. But now I think, maybe the monk wasn't calm because he didn't feel the loss. Maybe he was calm because he had already accepted that nothing was ever truly his to keep. That's the heart of impermanence. It doesn't ask us to suppress our emotions or pretend not to care. It simply invites us to stop fighting the truth. That life changes, that people change, that we change, and that's okay. There was a season in my life when everything felt like it was falling apart. A friendship I thought would last forever ended abruptly. A job I poured my soul into was lost. My health became unpredictable. At one point, I remember standing at the edge of my kitchen counter, hands gripping the cold surface, whispering, "Please, just let something stay." But nothing did. And eventually, something else happened. Something unexpected. In the absence of what I had clung to, space appeared. And in that space, I could finally breathe. When we cling, we contract. We close ourselves to the flow of life. But when we soften, when we surrender, even just a little, we make room. For new beginnings. For unexpected beauty. For peace. One morning, while walking through a quiet park in early autumn, I noticed a single leaf drifting down from a tree. It didn't fight. It didn't rush. It simply floated, spinning gently, catching the light, free in its descent. And I stood there for a long time watching it fall. That leaf became my teacher. So if you're holding on to something tightly right now, a relationship that's changing, a season of life that's ending, an old version of yourself you're afraid to let go of, I want you to know, you're not alone. This is the human condition. We all want to hold on to what feels safe, what feels familiar. But impermanence isn't the enemy. It's the flow beneath our feet, the current that carries us forward, even when we're not ready. Sometimes I imagine life as a river and myself as a little boat. Some days the water is calm. Other days it crashes and churns. But the river never stops. And the more I try to fight the current, the more exhausted I become. But when I finally sit back, when I let the river carry me, I remember this too is part of the journey. So if you're watching this, and something in your life is slipping through your fingers, I invite you to take a breath with me. Let it be slow, gentle, kind. And now imagine a leaf in your mind's eye. A golden, fragile leaf, letting go from its branch. Watch how it doesn't fall in panic, but in trust. It doesn't cling to the air, it dances with it. Can you let yourself do the same? Can you let go of just one small thing today? Maybe it's a resentment, or an expectation, or the way you think things should be. Maybe it's the story you've told yourself over and over, that you're behind, that you're not enough, that you're losing something too precious to survive without. Whatever it is, offer it to the river. Let the current carry it. You don't need to fix it all now. Just breathe. This moment, this letting go. It is enough. Buddhism doesn't promise us that pain will disappear, but it teaches us how to suffer less. And suffering less often begins when we stop saying, "This should not be happening," and start saying, "This is happening. How can I meet it with grace?" There's a Japanese term I love, mono no aware, the gentle sadness of things, the awareness that all things are fleeting, and in that very fleetingness lies beauty. The cherry blossoms that fall too soon, the laughter that fades into memory, the goodbye that never felt finished. These are not things to fear, they are things to honor. And so, as we close this quiet moment together, I want to offer you something simple. Not a solution, just a gentle practice. Each morning, before your day begins, place your hand on your chest. Breathe in deeply and say slowly, "I embrace impermanence." Feel it, not as a heavy truth, but as a soft release, a loosening of the grip, a turning toward the flow. because the river is already moving, with or without our permission. The question is, will we fight it, or will we float? I'm still learning. I still cling more often than I'd like. But more and more, I'm learning to trust the current. To whisper, like the old monk in the ashes, everything is like a dream, and then to begin again. Chapter 3, the tender strength of the heart, cultivating compassion for myself and others. There was a time, not too long ago, when I thought compassion was something you gave to others, like a gift you handed out when someone looked visibly hurt. You'd see someone struggling, and your heart would ache a little. You'd help. You'd care. You'd maybe cry a bit if the story was sad enough. But I didn't think much about what it meant to offer that same care inwardly, to the small, bruised parts of myself I tried so hard to hide from others. Until one day, in the middle of a meditation retreat, I cracked open. It wasn't dramatic.
No saben.
No mystical realization. Just stillness. A kind of fragile silence that let an old ache rise up from where I'd buried it. I don't remember exactly what triggered it. Maybe it was the sound of a wind chime just outside the wooden hall, or the way the tea steamed in the morning air. But something in that gentle moment made me realize I had spent most of my life being kind to others, and so terribly unkind to myself. If you've ever caught yourself saying things to your own heart that you'd never dream of saying to someone else, then maybe you know the feeling. The sharpness of the inner critic. The whisper that says, "You should be better by now. You always mess this up. Why can't you just get it together?" We learn to hide it under layers of competence, humor, even spiritual practice. But it's there. That quiet shame. That background hum of not enoughness. And yet, what I've come to realize is that compassion, true healing compassion, has to begin right there. In the middle of that mess. Not when we've figured it all out. Not when we've finally become the ideal version of ourselves. But right here, right now, with this imperfect breath, with this tired, beautiful, wildly human heart, there's an image that helps me remember. Picture a mother holding her crying child. She doesn't say, "Stop crying. You're embarrassing me." She doesn't say, "Why are you still upset about this?" She simply holds them. No words, just presence, warmth, safety, a shelter made of arms. Now imagine doing that for yourself. I know it might sound strange, but the truth is, there's a childlike part of each of us that still longs to be held that way, especially in moments of fear, especially when we feel lost or not good enough. And when we begin to offer ourselves that same tender attention, something begins to shift. The heart softens, the shame loosens, the healing begins. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is an eternal law." I used to hear that and think it applied mostly to wars, to global conflict, to the anger between nations. But now I hear it differently. Hatred doesn't end with more self-hatred. Judgment doesn't dissolve through more judgment. The inner wars we fight aren't won by tightening the fist, but by opening the hand. Compassion is how we lay down our weapons. But let's be honest, it's not easy, especially when it comes to forgiving ourselves. I remember a conversation I had with an older woman at a temple in the countryside. We were sweeping the courtyard together, leaves crunching beneath the bamboo brooms, when she suddenly said, "I've made peace with everyone in my life, except myself." Her voice cracked on the last word. She had carried something for decades, a decision she regretted, a moment she wished she could rewrite. And despite all the wisdom she shared with others, she still held herself hostage. That's the thing. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the one staring back in the mirror. But here's what Buddhist practice gently offers us. The truth that we are not our mistakes. We are not frozen in the past. We are ever-changing, like water, like wind. And every breath is an invitation to begin again. Forgiveness, then, is not weakness. It's courage. The courage to say, "I will not keep wounding myself for something I can no longer undo. I choose to learn. I choose to grow. And yes, I choose to love anyway." And that love, that compassion, when practiced inwardly, naturally begins to extend outward. Like ripples in a still pond. Suddenly, the person who cut you off in traffic becomes less of an enemy and more of a mystery. The colleague who annoys you becomes someone you silently wish peace for. Even the stranger crying in the grocery store aisle. Something in you softens, instead of turning away. You begin to see people not as problems to solve, but as stories unfolding. Just like you. One of the most beautiful teachings in Buddhist tradition is the Metta meditation, also known as loving kindness. Simple, but it's powerful. You begin by offering well wishes to yourself, then to someone you love, then to someone neutral, then to someone difficult, and eventually to all beings. But it always starts with you. Not because you're more important, but because you can't pour from an empty cup. I remember the first time I did the full metta sequence. I got to the part where I had to wish well-being to someone I resented deeply. My jaw tightened, my heart closed like a fist. But I said the words anyway, even if I didn't mean them. May you be happy. May you be safe. May you live with ease. And something unexpected happened. The act of saying those words, even without full sincerity, planted a seed. A seed that didn't bloom right away, but over time, began to soften my armor. And now, years later, I often find myself spontaneously wishing peace upon strangers, and even upon the versions of myself I once disliked. That's what compassion does. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't erase all pain, but it makes space. It breathes softness into places that had gone rigid. It creates room for something new. So if you're watching this and you've been harsh with yourself lately, if you've been holding on to a grudge, or silently punishing yourself for being imperfect, I invite you to try something. Close your eyes just for a moment. Let your breath slow. Feel your body settle, like a leaf gently resting on still water. And repeat quietly in your mind, may I be kind. May I be well. May I be free from suffering. You don't have to believe it right away. You just have to begin. And if you're open, extend those same wishes to someone else. Maybe someone you love, or someone you're struggling with, or maybe just the world. May you be kind. May you be well. May you be free from suffering. This practice, done daily, is like water gently shaping stone. It doesn't demand. It doesn't rush, but it transforms. And so does compassion. It teaches us that love isn't something we earn by being flawless. It's something we return to again and again as our natural state. And maybe, just maybe, the healing of the world begins with a single person whispering, I am learning to be gentle with myself, and meaning it. Chapter 4. A quiet light in the dark, walking the path of wisdom. I used to think wisdom lived somewhere far away, maybe on a mountaintop, in the silence of a cave, in the ancient eyes of monks who hadn't spoken in decades, or in dusty old books filled with language I didn't understand. Felt distant, mysterious, something reserved for those who'd already figured life out. And then one night, I got lost in the woods. It was late autumn. I had stayed out too long, trying to clear my mind with a walk after a rough day. I didn't expect the sky to darken so quickly, or the path to disappear under a blanket of wet leaves. My phone had barely any signal. The flashlight was weak. I remember the cold breath of the wind brushing against my ears, the quiet creak of branches overhead. And then, I saw it. A tiny lantern hanging near a fork in the trail, left by someone kind, I suppose, to guide the way for wanderers like me. The flame inside barely flickered, but it was enough. Enough to see just a few steps ahead. Enough to keep going. Enough to remind me, wisdom doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be present. That night, I started seeing wisdom differently. Not as a finish line, but as a companion. A quiet friend who walks beside you, whispering gently, pause, breathe, look again. In Buddhist teaching, wisdom prajna is not just about knowing the right answers. It's about seeing clearly, not with the eyes, but with the heart. It's the understanding that arises not from information, but from insight. And often it comes not with a bang, but with a breath. The Buddha once spoke of the middle way, the path of balance. Neither indulgence nor denial, neither clinging nor resistance. He shared this teaching with Ananda, his devoted attendant, after realizing that extreme fasting and rigid asceticism weren't the way to awakening. He had nearly died in his pursuit of perfection before understanding that true liberation lives in the center. in balance. That lesson changed everything for me, because like many of us, I was raised in a world of extremes. All or nothing, success or failure, black or white, push harder, be better, do more. And when that didn't work, I swung to the other side, giving up entirely, numbing out, disconnecting. But the Buddha's wisdom offered something softer, something quieter, a middle path, a space where I could still care deeply without clinging tightly, where I could strive without self-punishment, where I could feel pain without drowning in it. Wisdom isn't loud. It doesn't shout over your thoughts. It waits. Sometimes I picture it like a lantern inside the chest, small, steady, glowing, not enough to light up the whole road, but enough to show you the next right thing. And often, that next right thing is surprisingly ordinary. It's the choice to respond instead of react, to pause before sending the email, to take a breath before raising your voice, to ask, what's really going on here? Instead of assuming the worst. It's in those tiny, unseen moments where wisdom truly lives. There was a time when I thought being wise meant having all the answers. Now, I think wisdom is learning to live with the questions and letting them soften you instead of harden you. Like the question, why did they hurt me? Or, what if I never figure it out? Or even the simple one, what matters most right now? Wisdom doesn't always give you answers. Sometimes it just invites you to listen deeper, to notice the space between your thoughts, to trust that you don't have to fix everything right away. You just have to be awake for it. A friend once told me that wisdom feels like standing at the edge of a lake at dawn, the world still asleep, the sky just beginning to shift. And in that quiet, something inside you says, this is enough. And so much of that wisdom comes from learning how to relate to your own mind, how to watch your thoughts instead of becoming them, how to sit with a feeling without being swallowed by it. One practice that's helped me more than I can say is incredibly simple, but not always easy. It's just this: observe without judgment. Let thoughts rise like bubbles in a stream, and let them pass without chasing or fighting. Notice the urge to fix, to label, to react, and then breathe instead. There was a day, not long ago, when someone said something to me that really stung. It wasn't cruel exactly, but it hit a raw place I hadn't fully healed. My first instinct was to defend myself, to prove I was right, to be sharper than their words. But then I remembered the lantern, and I paused. I sat quietly for a few minutes. I watched the thoughts. They don't understand me. I'm not respected. Maybe I'm just too sensitive. I felt the heat rising in my chest, the quickening of breath. And instead of reacting, I waited. Eventually, the noise softened. And underneath it, I found something truer. I'm hurting. I wanted to be seen. That was the wisdom, not in the clever comeback, but in the willingness to stay with the feeling long enough to see the real need underneath the pain. And from that place, my response was different, softer, honest, not from ego but from insight. These are the moments that shape our lives, not the big declarations but the quiet choices, the micro decisions of how we treat others, how we speak to ourselves, what we choose to carry and what we gently set down. Wisdom, after all, is not a thing you get. It's a way you move. And like any path, it asks for attention, for care, for presence. So if you're watching this right now and you're unsure of what to do next in your life, if you're facing a choice or a crossroad, I want to offer you something simple. You don't need to know the whole answer. You just need to light the lantern within. Maybe that means pausing before you say yes, or giving yourself permission to rest, or being honest about a truth you've been avoiding. Maybe it means doing the next kind thing, or the next honest thing, or simply the next breath. That's the path, step by step, lit not by certainty, but by sincerity. And if you ever feel lost, remember, even in the darkest forest, the tiniest flame still shines. It only takes one small light to guide the way. So tonight or tomorrow morning or whenever you're able, sit somewhere quiet. Feel your breath rise and fall. Picture that lantern in your chest. And listen, ask gently, what would wisdom do next? Not your fear, not your pride, not your past, but the small, glowing part of you that knows how to love and how to see clearly. That part is always there, waiting, walking beside you. Chapter 5. Beneath the surface, the stillness, I am at peace with myself. I used to believe that peace was something waiting at the end of the road, that once I fixed everything, healed every wound, paid off the bills, achieved all the goals, I'd arrive at this magical place where everything inside me was soft and still, where I'd no longer be haunted by restlessness, comparison, or that quiet anxiety that showed up right before bed. But peace, as I slowly discovered, doesn't live at the end of anything. It's not a prize or a destination. It's something we return to, something we remember, and strangely enough, it often arrives when we stop trying so hard to find it. One morning, a few years ago, I found myself sitting beside a small lake. It was early, still half dark. The kind of morning where dew clings to grass like tiny glass pearls, and the only sound is the hush of wind moving through trees. The lake was utterly still, like a mirror. Clouds drifted lazily above it, reflected with such precision it was hard to tell which sky was real. And in that silence, something opened in me. A thought whispered through the stillness, not from my mind exactly, but from somewhere quieter. Peace isn't something you build. It's what remains when you stop stirring the waters. That image has stayed with me ever since, because most of the time we're splashing around so much, thoughts thrashing, emotions flaring, old stories echoing, that we never give the lake of our being a chance to settle. But when we do, when we sit, breathe, wait, when we let the clouds come and go without chasing them, something beautiful happens. The stillness returns. There's a Zen story I love about a young monk who was obsessed with achieving enlightenment. He meditated harder than anyone else in the monastery. He fasted. He isolated himself. He read every sutra and chanted for hours. But the more he tried, the more frustrated he became. Finally, one evening, the old master came to sit with him by a quiet pond. The young monk, exasperated, said, "Why can't I find it? I'm doing everything right." The master didn't answer. He picked up a stick and stirred the water. Mud rose, swirling. Then he let the stick fall, and they both watched as the water slowly calmed. When the water is still, the master said, the moon reflects. Sometimes we stir our own water so much, trying to fix ourselves, to become more spiritual, more peaceful, more enlightened, that we forget peace doesn't need effort. It needs space. In Buddhism, there's a beautiful word for this balance, upekkha. It's often translated as equanimity, but that word can sound a little distant, a little too quiet. In truth, upekkha is the deepest kind of calm. Not a numbing out, but a sacred stillness that watches the chaos of the world without collapsing into it. It's the calm in the storm, not because the storm stopped, but because something inside you did. I've seen this quality most clearly in people who have suffered deeply and survived with softness. A woman I once knew lost her child in a tragic accident. For a long time, she disappeared into grief. And then one day, she showed up at a small mindfulness circle I used to host. She didn't say much, just sat quietly week after week. One evening, during a sharing round, she finally spoke. "The pain never left," she said, "but now it no longer drags me under. It floats." That's upekkha, not denial, not detachment, but a kind of loving steadiness that says, yes, this hurts. Yes, this matters. And I can still sit with it. I can still breathe. I think the deepest kind of peace is born not from avoiding life's intensity, but from learning how to hold it gently. And this begins with noticing our emotional triggers, the buttons that get pushed, the waves that rise. Someone criticizes you, and your chest tightens. You remember an old failure, and your stomach knots. A plan falls apart, and suddenly you're back in a spiral of self-blame or anger or despair. These reactions are human, normal, conditioned, but they are not the end of the story. Because with awareness, with mindfulness, we can begin to pause, to feel the wave rise, and choose not to ride it. To say, anger is here, or fear is visiting, or simply, I see you, pain, I'm here. And in that tiny pause, that sacred breath, peace begins to bloom. Not because the trigger vanished, but because you didn't vanish inside it. I've started doing something small that helps me return to that quiet center. Maybe it will help you too. When I feel the storm coming, anxiety, frustration, overwhelm, I stop, even if just for 30 seconds. I place a hand on my chest, and I breathe. On the inhale, I say silently, I accept. On the exhale, I say, I am at peace. Sometimes I don't believe it fully. That's okay. The breath doesn't ask for belief, only permission. I accept. I am at peace. It's like smoothing the surface of the lake, just a little, making room for the reflection of the sky. The more I do it, the more I remember that peace was never outside of me. It wasn't waiting in someone's approval or a future achievement or the resolution of all problems. It was here, in this breath, in this moment, in this simple decision not to fight myself anymore. So if you've been chasing peace, running toward it like a destination you never seem to reach, maybe it's time to stop. Not give up, but stop, sit, breathe, and let the water settle. Let the moon reflect. Let your own stillness rise to meet you, because you don't have to earn peace. You are peace. You just forgot for a while. And now you remember. And now maybe you see it too. Peace doesn't come when life finally settles. It comes when you do. It's not in fixing, chasing, or achieving. It's in waking up gently and choosing to speak to yourself like someone you love. One line at a time, one breath at a time, like morning light across still water. The heart remembers how to be soft again. Not perfect, not always calm, but awake, aware, kind. So I leave you with this simple invitation. Tomorrow morning, before the noise begins, before the roles return, pause and whisper something true to yourself. Because how you speak to yourself is how your soul will listen. Have you ever tried starting your day this way? What line spoke to you the most today? Let me know below. I'd love to hear what resonated. And if your heart feels a little lighter now, consider subscribing, not just to a channel, but to this quiet way of living, where each word you say to yourself can become a seed of awakening. See you in the next video. Until then, may you be well, and may your mornings be filled with gentleness and grace.